Today, this is my favorite topic, baby. We're gonna be talking about picking up the phone. Okay, prospecting, doing your calls, making those connections. So today it's all about picking up the phone. So I wrote down a few tips, few ideas for getting you to pick up the phone. And why is this critical? Why, as a professional realtor, do you need to make those calls? Do you need to make those calls? Yes, we do. Why? Because you're a salesperson. That's what you do. Hey, like if you really think about what is your job, and your job is finding a buyer, finding a seller, and putting them together. And you do that through conversations. And what's the easiest way to have a conversation? You pick up the phone. That's the easiest way to have a conversation. So we're going to jump right into it. So the topic I wrote down is 10 tips to picking up the phone and to make your damn calls. That's what I wrote down here. So because at one point or another, we kind of get into a funk. We get tied into the idea that, hey, I could be putting out more stuff on social. I could be doing that. But we actually get into a little bit of a funk and we don't feel like picking up the phone. Has anyone have that? Has anyone said, hey, I really don't want to pick up the phone and make my calls today, right? And we make all kinds of excuses. We procrastinate, we find something else to do. We start shuffling papers from one side of the desk to the other, right? Because, the key is to get out of this funk and get back to that routine as quickly as possible. So today I put together kind of 10 tips to get us there. So the first tip I want you to write down. When it comes to getting back into making your calls, number one is create the right atmosphere, right? That right environment to be successful, to make those calls. Just because you're making the calls doesn't mean that you can't, change the energy in the room, right? Maybe put on some music, right? Get yourself pumped up before making those calls. Standing up, right? Making the calls, standing up, move your body and that energy to create that energy that you need to be on the phones, right? Get the adrenaline flowing through your body, get the blood pumping, right? And at the end of the day, is once you have that energy going, just pick up the phone and make those calls, right? Now you're ready to kind of connect with people. Right. So tip number one is create the right atmosphere. I would put up a mirror so you can look in mirrors, see yourself smiling, put up your goals, take a look at the goals. This is my why. This is why I'm doing this, right? Having the music, having that environment to say, hey, I'm ready. Okay. Tip number two, affirm your greatness. See, several people, suggest that affirmations out loud can get yourself in the right mindset. So take the time to chant out loud some positive affirmations. I would recommend stuff like, hey, I love making my calls. I'm a lean, mean appointment setting machine. I love helping people that are waiting for me to call them. Right? People want to hear from me. I bring value to my clients, right? I choose to work on developing my success on the phone. People are lucky to work with me. So whatever it is, whatever you're affirming, right? Chant it out loud. Now, here's the thing with affirmations. They can also be negative. They're not always positive. So you have to be very careful what you're feeding your mind. So whatever it is that you want to change in your routine, right? Affirm that, right? So put yourself in the positive. Like, I'm a lean, mean listing machine. If listings are what's key to you, chant that out loud, write that out. Affirmations are extremely powerful to changing your mindset, to changing what's actually happening around you. Believe in them, right? All right, tip number three. Change your perception. One of the main barriers for not making your calls is thinking that the calls are sales calls. Like, I'm bugging people, right? So if you change the narrative to what you're really doing, it's engaging with prospective customers or buyers or sellers and seeing how it is that you can help them achieve their real estate goals. That's a different perception than I'm making my calls or I'm bugging them, right? So don't think of it as cold calls or prospecting or sales calls at all. Name it something else. Change that perception, right? Be more positive. Maybe look at it, view it from it's a service call. I'm being of service to the people on the other end of the phone versus a sales call. By simply changing the perception of it, of what you're doing, will get you back into making those calls, back into connecting with more people, right? So tip number 3 is change your perception of what it is that you're doing, okay? Tip number 4, make sure to practice what you're going to say, right? I would say that this is probably half the battle. Not knowing what to say, not having a script or a dialogue to follow is probably one of the main reasons why we do not make our calls. See, and the last thing we want to do is be practicing on our clients. So whenever you practice something, you get more comfortable with it. A lot of the apprehension that I see with agents is due to the fact that they really don't know what to say, and they're afraid of being put on the spot. So I would say practicing the conversations, working on that, knowing and anticipating where the conversation's going, right? And this is why we role play, and it's so important. See, the more you internalize the scripts and dialogues, the more comfortable you are on the phone, the more likely you're going to make those calls. So do you have it in your schedule? Is role playing the conversations part of your morning routine? Do you have 1 or 2 or 3 different role play partners that you can share and practice what you're going to say on the phone? The more you practice, the more comfortable you become. The more comfortable you become making the calls, this is now becoming an asset for yourself. So working on, making sure that you practice your craft. This is your craft. It's knowing what to say, knowing how to pace and lead a conversation, being able to handle the objections that come your way, and anticipating those type of objections. Practicing, there's several different types of scripts and dialogues you should be practicing and knowing. The first I would write down is your lead generation scripts. Now, do you need to know all of them? No, of course not. If you only have 4 different lead generation kind of sources, then all you need to master are those 4 lead gen scripts. The next one that you need to master would be lead follow-up. What are the questions you're asking during that follow-up period to set that appointment? So lead follow-up will be another set of scripts that you need to learn. Then we have the qualifying script. When you set an appointment, what is the motivational questions that you're going to ask, right? You need to know the presentation scripts, be it a buyer presentation or a seller presentation. You need to master those. And of course, we need to learn how to handle an objection, right? We're going to get objections. And again, like we talked in the past, objections is simply a question in the mind of the seller. But there is a technique that you use to handle that objection, right? So by practicing the different kind of dialogues and scripts that you're going to use, because everything you say to a consumer, for the most part, there should be a baseline of what you're following, right? If I'm going to follow certain scripts so I can set that appointment. I'm going to follow certain scripts so I can get a better idea of what their motivation is and how to work them. I'm going to follow a script in a presentation. But you know what? You're also going to follow a script when it comes to negotiating an offer. How do we get the buyer to come up on price? Because we're in a competitive market. We're going to also practice how to, get a price reduction from the seller. So this is all scripts and dialogues. And the more you follow them, right, the more business you get. That's really what it comes down to it, is you're able to come naturally out of you. All right, tip number 5. We need to adopt the right mindset, right? So if you pick up the phone with that nagging suspicion that you're bothering people, then you're never going to forge the type of relationship that successful agents do with their prospects, right? See, your mindset plays a massive role when it comes to the success or failure when making your calls, right? So let's start believing in what it is that you're doing. Like not only your head, but in your heart, that you are the right agent for the job, right? If you think of it from that perspective and how in today's marketplace, there are so many bad agents, like really bad agents out there, right? And you're here to make this call to help these folks not get mixed up with these bad agents. Anyone ever work with a bad agent? Like, I mean, a seriously bad agent who has no intention to really help anyone other than themselves. Like that's their intention. And you have an obligation because you are an awesome agent. You know that. You are an awesome agent and you're there for the client. So I'm going to challenge you that you have an obligation to make these calls, to connect with people, to help them get away from connecting with people who are really not that good, right? They don't have their best interests at heart, right? The next one I wrote down, number 6, is, this is a little bit of tough love here, folks. Here it comes. Choose your hard. Choose your hard. See, I get it, right? And I'm not trying to say that it's super easy to pick up the phone. I'm not, right? Making your calls obviously takes great discipline to making those calls. Because if it was easy, to be honest with everyone here, right, we'd all be rich. You know, there'll be far less reasons for having a coach like myself to exist. And at the end of the day, everyone would do it. But let's examine the alternative for a second here, right? Because that's hard too. Yes, making your calls are hard, right? So is struggling to pay your bills. Like think about that for a second. So is telling your kids that they can't go to that school because you can't afford to send them there. So is the stress of not knowing when the next paycheck will come from. In life, we have to choose our heart, right? When viewing, the perspective, I would say that it's a lot easier to pick up the phone and have a few conversations with people every day than it is to be denied what it is that you deserve. Because at the end of the day, we have to choose which hard. Is it picking up the phone? Or is it that you have to go get a part-time job because you can't pay your bills? That's really what comes down to it. Choose your hard. So that's number 6. Number 7, work from a script, right? Really work from a script. Don't wing it. It's not about you coming up with the ideas at the moment. It's follow a script, just like the way I am right now. I am following a script, right? One of the most important things you can do when it comes to making your calls is following a script, pacing and leading that conversation, knowing exactly where you're going with that conversation. Don't wing it. It's not about improv here, right? Have a script. Next one I wrote down, number 8. I wrote down, they can sense it, right? And the one thing I would say, and this is really simple, is smile when you're making your calls. The person on the other phone can sense it, right? And that's also true in the opposite scenario. If you're nervous, if you're scared, if you're disinterested, they can sense that too, right? And you're wasting everyone's time. So it is critically important that you smile and want to make these calls. You've convinced yourself that you're the right agent to be connected with them, and they sense that. When you have that swagger, that confidence in making the calls, they can sense that, right? So remember, the most important thing here is to, I'm not going to say fake it till you make it because I don't believe in that. It's believe in yourself before you can make those calls. If you're not believing in yourself, they can sense that. All right. I got 2 more tips. So number 9, you'll feel better after making the calls. Right? It's like comparing yourself to going to the gym. You might not feel like going to the gym and doing what you have to do, but once you've done that, you feel much better. Right? And that's the same thing, that adrenaline rush that you get from working out, you get the same for after making the calls. So just understand that, hey, if I just make my calls, I'm going to enjoy it afterwards. It's going to be a sense of satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment comes over you once you complete those calls. So have a standard for yourself. How much time am I going to spend making the calls? How many conversations? Once you hit that goal, put the headset down, done. Get that sense of accomplishment for achieving your goal, whatever that may be. So just do it. Just make the calls. And the last one I have written down here is, what's the worst thing that can actually happen when making the calls? What's the worst thing that can happen? Let's compare the upside versus the downside of making your calls. Upside, you connect with more people in the community. You provide value. You build rapport. You set up some appointments. You sell more homes and you make more money. That's the upside. What's the downside? Maybe a couple of people hang up on you. Really? Right? There are still homeowners out there that might think that they need to wait because of COVID, because it's not completely gone, and before they decide to sell their home safely. Your job is to reach out to these folks, to educate them, to get them going in the market, to give them the opportunity to move forward in their lives, right? And in the process, giving yourself the opportunity to get more listings, to sell more homes, to create more happy clients, and of course, to put more money in your bank. Remember that everything happens outside your comfort zone. So force yourself to make the calls, to find the support and accountability that you need, to make it consistent and to make it a discipline every single day. So that's my 10 tips to why you need to be making your calls. Does anyone have any questions, concerns, hallucinations regarding what I just said?
I've got one for you, Danny. Well, it's more of the same thing in regards to making calls. As you know, there's a colleague of mine sent me a video of another realtor who does it, and he calls it dialing and drinking or something like that.
Dialing. I've heard dialing for dollars.
Yeah, but this one actually, he'll drink beer and make phone calls, and he'll cold call, and he uses a dialer. So I was going to ask you, what kind of dialer do you recommend? But he films it live. It's hilarious.
I love it. I think that's brilliant. I'll be honest with you. I love a dialer. If you're going to be putting in the time and effort, the one I would recommend is called Mojo Cells. It's MOJO cells.com. They are by far the best dialer on the market. They use copper wiring for their dials. It's not a VoIP system. So I highly recommend, if you're going to go down this route, if you're going to go down the route of having a dialer, you should get a landline to wherever you're making your calls. Do not use your cell number, right? Because it's bouncing off towers. With a landline, it's copper wiring. It's in there, right? Yes, Mojo's in the States, but Nick, I have used it in Canada since 2008 when they first opened up, when they first started. Doesn't matter, right? You are going to need to have an international plan, Nick. So with to be honest with you guys, it's like $20 to get a phone line in your house for each, and then another $10 for unlimited international calls to the US, because you do have to call into the US, right? And I was doing it, and here's my numbers. I can tell you honestly, I was having 30 conversations an hour on average, 30 an hour. And I'm talking about like good conversations. Like I'm going through my scripts, asking the questions and moving on, right? If you really think about 30 an hour, that's 2 minutes per person. There are going to be some people, because it dials 3 numbers at a time. The system's brilliant. Once, let's say all 3 people pick up the phone, right? The computer gives you 1 person to talk to, while the other 2 hear a recording of your voice in which you're saying something to the effect of, hello, I can't hear you. I'll call you right back. The system goes on pause, hangs up on those clients, and you finish whatever the conversation is with that first person. It picks one of the other people, calls them back. Oh, I can hear you now. Then you jump into your conversation, right? It's brilliant. So if you want to go with a dialer, that's the one I would recommend without question. Great question. Anyone else have any questions?
Sorry, Dan, one more. What about just using a VA then, or someone to make the calls for you if you want to use the check equity?
So 2 things with that. it's a VA. It's not you. And you need to make your calls. I don't care how many VAs you have. You need to make your calls. And number two, they're not licensed realtor. And from what I understand from pretty much every jurisdiction, you can't talk to people without having a real estate license about real estate, right? So I know that that's a case in Canada and most states, right? You could have a VA to make your calls, but that's not a gray area. That's a very much a black area, right? Like what you're doing there is illegal when they're doing that. But I'm not going to say anything if you don't to anyone, but that is what's happening. When someone else is calling that's not licensed for you, they cannot talk about real estate because they're not licensed that way, right? So be careful of that, right? I say it's well worth it, the $150 a month for a dialer without question. All right, folks, any other questions, concerns, hallucinations? All right, you guys are awesome. So please unmute yourselves. Looking at you, Nick, looking at you. All right. What day's the day, baby?
It's money making day.
Oh, Carmen jumped right in there. Yeah, it is a money making day. So what do you have to do in your business right now to help you move the needle? You guys are awesome. I'll talk to all of you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Zach.